Welcome to Mysteries and Crime, where we unravel the darkest secrets buried beneath the surface. Tonight we uncover a chilling case of deception, betrayal, and unthinkable tragedy, the Watts family murders. Can you decipher tonight's clue? Here it is. What led investigators to suspect the husband so quickly? Stay sharp. The answer is hidden within our story. On August 13th, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, a family disappeared without a trace. Shanann Watts, a pregnant mother, and her two daughters, Bella and Celeste, were missing. Her husband, Chris Watts, appeared distraught. But something about his story didn't sit right with investigators. Then, the horrifying truth emerged. The morning of August 13th started like any other. But for Shanann Watts' friend, Nicole Atkinson, something felt terribly wrong. Shanann, who was 20 weeks pregnant, had just returned from a business trip. Yet by morning, she wasn't answering calls or texts. Nicole drove to the Watts' home, knocking, calling, pleading for a response. Silence. She contacted Chris Watts, who claimed Shanann had taken the kids to a friend's house, but her car, purse, even her shoes were still inside the house. The police arrived, and bodycam footage captured Chris appearing nervous, fidgety, unconvincing. Hours turned into an investigation, and the missing persons case gained urgency. Inside the home, nothing seemed disturbed. But neighbors noticed something odd. Chris's demeanor, forced, unnatural. Surveillance footage from a nearby house would provide a chilling clue. A neighbor's camera captured Chris Watts backing his truck into the driveway early that morning, loading something into it. Police pressed him, but his story crumbled. Then, days later, a confession, but one riddled with lies. The bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were found in a desolate oil field. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Shanann Watts was 34 years old, a devoted mother, a dedicated entrepreneur, and a woman who radiated warmth and determination. Born on January 10th, 1984, in Passaic, New Jersey, she grew up in North Carolina, where she met and later married Chris Watts in 2012. Their love story, at least in the beginning, seemed like a fairy tale, full of joy, laughter, and dreams for the future. Shanann was a thriving businesswoman in the health and wellness industry, working as a sales representative for a nutrition company. Her passion was helping others feel their best, and she used social media as her platform to inspire and uplift. Her Facebook was filled with videos of her daughters, Bella and Celeste, as well as posts about her marriage, chronicling the seemingly happy life they built together in Frederick, Colorado. Her two daughters were the heart of her world. Bella, 4 years old, was the gentle soul, watchful, caring, and incredibly perceptive for her age. She had big brown eyes that held a quiet wisdom beyond her years. Celeste, 3, affectionately called Cece, was the wild one, fearless, full of energy, and always up for adventure. Together the girls shared a sisterly bond that was undeniable, filling their home with the purest love. Shanann had just announced she was expecting a third child, a boy they had already named Nico. The pregnancy had filled her with hope. Another new chapter for their family. She had even surprised Chris with the news, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Oops, we did it again," in a heartwarming video. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Shanann's close friends noticed her concerns in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She confided in them, revealing that Chris had grown distant, detached, as if he were a stranger in his own home. What had once been a picture-perfect life had begun to unravel. Then, Shanann vanished. Bella and Celeste were missing, and the illusion of perfection was shattered forever. Christopher Lee Watts, husband, father, murderer. Chris had always seemed like the doting husband, smiling in family photos, playing with his daughters. But behind that smile lurked a secret life, and a chilling detachment that would later horrify the world. At 33 years old, Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. He and Shanann had faced financial struggles, even filing for bankruptcy years prior, but money troubles weren't the only issue. Chris had met someone else, a woman named Nicole Kessinger. They began an affair, spending weekends together while Shanann was away on business. Nicole later claimed she had no idea Shanann was pregnant, and that Chris told her he was in the process of separating. When Shanann returned from her trip, she sensed something was wrong. Text messages revealed her fears. Chris was pulling away, showing no interest in the baby or their marriage. Then, everything changed. The morning after Shanann's return, she and the girls were gone. Chris stood before cameras begging for their safe return, but his lies unraveled quickly. His story shifted. First, he claimed he didn't know where they were. Then, after failing a polygraph, he spun another tale. He had only killed Shanann in a fit of rage after she allegedly hurt the children. The truth was far worse. Chris Watts had murdered his entire family and tried to bury them like a secret. August 13th, 2018, the day the Watts family vanished. In the stillness of the early morning, under the cover of darkness, an unspeakable horror unfolded inside the Watts family home. Shanann Watts arrived home from her business trip to Arizona at approximately 1:48 a.m. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, had dropped her off, and the Ring doorbell camera captured her final moments alive, walking into her home, unaware that death was waiting for her inside. Chris Watts, who had been asleep or pretending to be, awoke as she entered. According to his later confessions, they talked briefly before an argument erupted. Shanann had suspected his affair, and she had sent Chris emotional text messages in the days leading up to her trip, pleading for honesty, trying to save their crumbling marriage. But Chris was distant, unresponsive. He had already made his decision. At some point in those early morning hours, as their two young daughters slept down the hall, Chris made a horrifying choice. In his chilling confession, he described how he climbed on top of Shanann as she lay in bed and strangled her, pressing down with his full weight as she struggled beneath him. Shanann fought, but she never had a chance. Chris's grip tightened. Minutes passed, and then silence. The nightmare didn't end there. As Chris sat in the dark, his wife's lifeless body beside him, he heard something. A tiny voice. 4-year-old Bella had woken up. She had seen something. In the dim light of the room, she knew something was terribly wrong. "What's wrong with Mommy?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. Chris, caught in his own monstrous actions, panicked. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet, and then, in one of the most haunting details of the case, he gently picked up his two daughters still alive and placed them in the back seat of his truck. Their mother's body lay beside them. The girls, confused, still trusting their father, didn't cry. Not yet. They had no idea that the man they looked up to was about to take away everything they had ever known. Chris drove for 45 minutes to a remote oil site owned by his employer Anadarko Petroleum. The trip was long, silent. The girls sat in the back seat, innocent, unaware of the horror that awaited them. Did they talk? Did they whisper to each other in confusion? Did they hold hands? We may never know. Chris later admitted that when he arrived, he pulled his truck near the oil tanks. He took 3-year-old Celeste first. He covered her face with a blanket and suffocated her. There were no screams, no fighting back, just a small child's life, erased in an instant. Bella, still watching, must have realized what was happening. She was older, more aware. She must have known she was next. In a moment that would haunt investigators forever, Chris recounted his daughter's final plea. Through her tears, she begged, "Daddy, no." But he showed no mercy. He placed the blanket over her face and ended her life. When it was over, he disposed of their tiny bodies inside 2 separate crude oil tanks. He had calculated every move. The tanks were tall and narrow, ensuring they would be submerged and hidden. Then, he dug a shallow grave nearby and placed Shanann inside. Their unborn son, Nico, still inside her, would never take his first breath. Chris Watts stood alone in the silence of the oil field, surrounded by the evidence of his own unspeakable evil. When Chris returned home, it was almost as if nothing had happened. He showered. He went about his morning routine. He even texted Shanann's phone, pretending to be a worried husband, knowing full well she was buried in the dirt. That same morning, Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's best friend, was growing increasingly worried. Shanann had a doctor's appointment that she had never missed. She wasn't responding to calls or texts. Something was wrong. Nicole drove to the Watts home, knocking on the door, calling Chris, and ultimately alerting the police. Chris arrived soon after, acting concerned, but his behavior was off. He fidgeted. His responses seemed forced. When police searched the house, they found Shanann's purse, phone, and even her wedding ring, left on the nightstand, as if staged. But there were no signs of forced entry, no struggle. And then, the breakthrough. A neighbor's surveillance camera caught Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning. What had he loaded into it? Chris played it off, making excuses. But investigators weren't buying it. They brought him in for questioning. Chris initially denied everything. He played the role of the devastated husband, claiming he had no idea what had happened to his wife and children. But when police asked him to take a polygraph test, he failed spectacularly. The examiner later said it was the worst deception they had ever seen. Confronted with the evidence, Chris's story shifted. He claimed that after he told Shanann he wanted a divorce, she snapped, killing Bella and Celeste in a fit of rage. In retaliation, he killed her. It was a desperate attempt to paint himself as the victim, but investigators knew better. Finally, backed into a corner, he confessed. But even then, the full, horrifying truth wouldn't come out until months later. It wasn't until February 2019, in a prison interview, that Chris Watts revealed the full truth, that Bella and Celeste had been alive when he drove them to the oil site, and that he had killed them one by one. This final admission shattered any lingering doubts. It was calculated. It was deliberate. It was pure evil. Chris Watts had murdered his entire family, not in a moment of rage, but in a selfish, methodical act designed to erase his old life and start fresh with his mistress. For days, he lied. He smiled for the cameras, pleaded for their return, as if he didn't know exactly where they were. But the evidence was there, the surveillance footage, the the failed polygraph, the contradictions. His facade crumbled, the truth emerged, and the world watched in horror. From the moment Chris Watts reported his family missing, law enforcement sensed something was off. His demeanor was eerily detached, his words rehearsed, his concern forced. Detectives knew they had to act fast. The Frederick Police Department, along with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, and the FBI, launched an aggressive investigation. They searched the Watts home, looking for any signs of forced entry, struggle, or clues. Chris cooperated, at first. But then, a major red flag. Neighbors showed police their security footage. It revealed Chris backing his truck into the driveway at an unusual hour, alone, loading something into it. Detectives needed more. They asked Chris to take a polygraph test. He agreed, confident in his lies. But the results were damning. He failed miserably. Investigators pressed harder. Chris crumbled. But his confession? It was only half the truth. Despite Chris Watts' shifting stories, forensic science played a crucial role in uncovering what really happened. Crime scene analysts found no signs of a break-in, no struggle. The house was eerily intact. Then, the discovery of the bodies at the oil site presented new challenges. Bella and Celeste had been placed in separate oil tanks, making forensic recovery extremely difficult. The crude oil had deteriorated evidence, complicating autopsies. Still, the medical examiner made grim conclusions. Both girls were smothered. Bella fought back. Scratches were found inside her mouth, evidence that she had tried to resist. Shanann's autopsy confirmed strangulation, and inside her, an unborn baby, Nico, who never got to take his first breath. Chris had tried to erase them. Science made sure he couldn't. When news of the Watts family's disappearance broke, the small town of Frederick, Colorado was shaken. A loving mother and her 2 daughters, gone without a trace. The community rallied, praying for their safe return. Candlelight vigils were held. Hope remained, until the truth surfaced. When Chris Watts confessed, shock turned to rage. How could a father, someone who was supposed to protect his children, commit such a heinous act? Social media exploded. The case became a symbol of betrayal and the darkness that can hide behind the most picture-perfect facades. Even now, people still ask, why? The Watts family murders became one of the most widely covered crimes in recent history. News outlets dissected every detail. Chris Watts' interview, where he pretended to be worried about his missing family, played on repeat. True crime communities erupted with theories. Then, surveillance footage was released, and the world watched Chris Watts seal his own fate. Documentaries, books, interviews, everyone sought to understand the why. The case remains a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we think we know best. At first, investigators considered multiple theories. Had Shanann left voluntarily? Had someone broken in? Was there a third party involved? But the evidence pointed to one person, Chris Watts. His polygraph failure, surveillance footage, and inconsistencies made it clear he was lying. Yet, even after confessing, questions remained. Did his mistress, Nicole Kessinger, know more than she admitted? She insisted she had no role in the murders, but many speculated otherwise. Internet sleuths combed through her search history, noting disturbing details. She had Googled how much money mistresses make after their lovers' wives die. Coincidence or something more? Chris Watts never faced a lengthy trial, because in the end, he confessed to everything. Initially, he blamed Shanann for the girls' deaths, but when confronted with irrefutable evidence, he admitted the full truth. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Shanann, 1 for Nico, and 1 each for Bella and Celeste. He also faced additional charges for unlawful termination of a pregnancy and tampering with a deceased body. The judge spared him the death penalty at the request of Shanann's family. Instead, he received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Chris Watts will die behind bars, but his crimes will never be forgotten. Though the case is legally closed, mysteries remain. Why did Chris Watts do it? Was it only to start a new life with his mistress? Or was there something deeper? A darkness that had always been there? Some believe there were signs, that Shanann sensed something was wrong in her final weeks. Others question if someone else helped Chris, whether directly or indirectly. One thing is certain, this case left scars on a family, a community, and the nation. The Watts family murders became a chilling example of familicide, a crime where a parent kills their entire family. Experts analyze the case, trying to understand what drives someone to commit such unthinkable acts. Psychologists pointed to narcissism, financial stress, and emotional detachment. But for the public, the most haunting part wasn't just the crime. It was how normal Chris Watts seemed before it happened. The case serves as a grim reminder. As always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.